research indicates that India's API imports have increased from approximately 1% in 1991 to whopping 70% in 2019. For certain life-saving antibiotics like cephalosporin, penicillin, azithromycin, the import dependency is as high as 90% or even more. Besides, currently, India imports nearly 68% of APIs by value from China, so much so that China is the single source supplier for many of the critical intermediates and APIs, including high burden disease categories such as cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, and so on. I mean, some of these are in fact listed in national list of essential medicines list as well. In fact, the current market is largely dependent on single source for antibiotic APIs manufactured by the fermentation route, such as penicillin, macrolides, etc. And with that backdrop, I will now connect to Amit and invite him for his views on how on ground, let's say, Indian industry can get benefited in its quest to de-risk from single source, risk. Is China lockdown a veritable boon for India? So Amit, if you can share your considered views on the entire discussion on self-dependency, single sourcing risk, and the related aspects.
Thank you, Mahavir. Very good morning, everyone. Mahavir, I just want to check if I am audible.
Yeah, very much.
Okay, thank you. Very good morning. And it is a pleasure and a privilege to share this forum with such industry veterans and mentors. Many of you on this panel are my mentors. So warm greetings to you. And thank you, Mahavir, for having myself and IQVIA be part of this panel. For those who do not know who we are a merged organization which came together and was born as a merger of IMS Health and Quintiles. IMS Health is a global information leader and Quintiles is a global clinical research organization. So we have close to 15,000 people in India and service healthcare, pharma, and government. Dr. Dinesh Dua has really set the tone, and if I can use the word, lifted the energy of this entire discussion. Thank you, Dr. Dua, for so beautifully articulating the opportunity. And I would like to add a few points. One thing which is very, very pertinent to this discussion is the understanding and appreciation that the API industry, the global market, is almost growing at 3 to 4 times the overall industry growth. I think it's very important to understand that, because what is going on is both regulated and unregulated markets for APIs are growing between 8 to 9%. And it's so interesting that the regulated markets are seeing a lot of price related growth and the unregulated markets are seeing a lot of volume related growth. And we see that to continue, right? The other point to understand is because some of the therapy prices have seen a lot of decline, especially on the generic side, we stand to gain because it moves the industry towards a mindset of greater outsourcing and more consolidation of costs. And I'll come to Mahavir's point around China in a bit, but I think it's important to understand that the tailwinds are behind us, especially from a point of view of outsourcing of APIs and intermediates. Now, what is going on? If we look at it, both across molecules and markets, and why we said the growth drivers are behind us. One is pricing pressure, as I talked about. The other is the proportion of low value molecules is almost 60%. And by low value molecules in the global context, I mean molecules that have sales less than $5 million. Now, from that context, it really requires an industry model, which is very similar to what happened in technology. When Dr. Dua talked about technology and pharma, I can almost see parallel that when you have a fragmentation like this, then you do need platforms to service and bring together production in a consolidated way to drive efficiencies. The other thing that is happening is, of course, the domestic formulation companies are looking at captive capacity for their first to file a para 4 opportunities, which leads the other manufacturers to look at third party, right? And the other piece is, now if we come to India, Dr. Dua talked about the pharma market growth, and let me reaffirm that given the data we are seeing, of course, few months in India because of the corona COVID-19 crisis did see a blip, but we are fundamentally very confident of the long-term growth potential of India in double digits. And we see that it will continue to happen, both driven by the domestic market growth and how some of the Indian pharma companies are taking more and more dominant positions across the world. Now, the small molecule, which is the Indian opportunity for APIs, is growing, has grown at 15% CAGR between FY13 and FY18, and we expect that to continue to grow in double digits for the next 5 to 6 years. And if we look at that market, it is actually split. It's about $14 billion in India, between 12 to 14, and it's roughly split between regulated and semi-regulated in an equal way. Where does India now look at the tailwinds on gaining share in the global merchant API market? Now, India contributes to 27%, right? That's the generic API market, which is part of India. China is about 38%, Italy is about 15%, and others are about 21%. Now we see that share to change, where we think that Indian players will gain their share and India will become almost 33 to 35% in the next 3 to 5 years. China's share will decline from 38 to about 32, 33%. And Italy may grow because Italy is really focusing on this particular market, and the other share will give into India's share. So the market that is 25 to 26 billion today in total for these small molecules will double to literally $50 billion in the next 3 to 4 years. And I think that India will gain at the pressure that the Chinese companies have faced due to regulatory and other environmental issues, which will bring in more and more focus on incentivizing manufacturing in India. Now, of course, that is given that some of the government initiatives and incentives, and I will park that discussion maybe for the panel discussion in terms of what is enough or what is not enough. But one of the things, if we look at an index of manufacturing, and if we put India at 100 today, where 38 to 40% of the cost is power and utility, a similar cost, 30% is about manpower, 5 to 6% is about EHS, and the balance is all of the other plant maintenance. China used to be indexed at 80 vis-a-vis India's number of 100 till few years ago, and European players were anywhere between 115 to 120 on that same cost base. So China was 15% lower, Europe was 15 to 18% higher. Right now, that equation is changing, and the future expectation is that there will be a much larger increase on power and manpower and EHS cost, especially in China, which will make our cost base in India as good, if not better, than the cost base of China. That is our view, while the European cost base will actually continue to grow up. So the index we see will be for India between 115 to 117. China will be the same, and Europe maybe 130 to 135%. And that is really a tailwind, Mahavir, to your point, where we see India shaping up. The other piece, what we understand is that, and I'm not going to break down between KSM's intermediate and APIs because the dynamics are different. But the other thing we do understand is that the China plus one strategy, especially for global sourcing, does play a role or a tailwind again for us in India to really push forward how companies or countries will look at how to source from India. Do we have that? Now, having said that, I think one of the wild cards in this situation is our dependency not on APIs but on intermediates, especially from China. And I think one of the things we will need to look at, which I would love to hear the views of the industry veterans on the panel, is how do we cover the government support and incentive, not just for APIs, but also for intermediates for this entire industry to develop. And to us, I think this is the inflection point that is going to come forward for us in the next 5 to 10 years. And I do know that private equity investment. Some of the Indian companies are really focusing on what we are calling building API platforms, bringing together certain businesses, scaling up the management. And I think that the landscape in the next 5 to 6 years is going to be very different from India in a positive way. So Mahavir, I would like to pause here and hand the session back to you. Thank you.